Hey, what is going on, everybody? My name is Ty, and this is my Chevy 350 small block that we just built and installed in my square body Chevy. In the last video, we got all the power distribution wiring for the starter S terminal done. And thankfully we did it right, which means this sucker now officially cranks.
What did he say?
But before we can officially start this thing up for the first time, we do have a little bit more wiring to complete. First mission is to complete the chassis side of this engine harness. I've gone ahead and taken the rest of the wiring other than the power distribution stuff and separated it into two sections. First section is the stuff that we don't need to build the chassis side of that harness, and the other section here is all the wiring we're going to need that's going to eventually plug into that. Let's go ahead and cut this stuff to length and start building the female end of that connector. Just like that, the chassis side of the harness is officially, I would say, complete. But before we go ahead and wrap all this stuff up, because it's super ugly right now, and make it pretty, I do want to check that everything on this harness functions how it should. The first thing that we have to check is the electric choke on the side of the carburetor here. However, we are missing a pretty vital piece to make this operate. I'll give you a hint, we're standing on it. That's right, we haven't officially made a ground for the electric choke yet. But enough of the negativity, get it. Let's hook this up a different way, at least temporarily for now, to make sure that this choke functions how it should. And just like that, I have my test leads hooked up as a ground to this. And this, technically, when we flip the ignition on, should operate. Basically what we're looking for is for this flap right here to slowly open up when we have ignition power to that electric choke. All right, the ignition is officially on. It might take like 10 to 20 seconds for this thing to start actually opening, but if we're a little bit patient here, we should see this flap start to move. And as you can see, we are slowly but surely opening this flap up as it should. So we know that this electric choke is working properly. We can confirm that by coming to the side here and kind of watching this thing rotate. It's very, very slow, but that's how the choke is supposed to work. And slowly it will open that up until that is completely open and there's no choke anymore. Next up on the list, we've installed a spark tester, and we're gonna make sure that the coil, or the power for the coil, is working properly and we get spark jumping across this gap right there. So this might be a little difficult to film, but I'm gonna do my best here as I hit the starter. And we'll see if we got spark. And as you can see, we do. Welcome to the inside of this truck, which I technically haven't shown you yet, but the next thing that we want to check is actually going to entail installing the instrument cluster, because we need to check to make sure that we've got oil pressure reading. And this is for two reasons. One, we've obviously got to make sure that the engine has good oil pressure before we go ahead and try and fire this thing up. But two, I need to make sure that the wiring to the oil pressure sensor is working properly and that we're getting a good oil pressure reading. And that is going to be shown on this gauge right here. Coolant temp, obviously we don't have any coolant in the truck right now, and it's cold, so we're not going to be able to check this until we actually fire this thing up. And then finally, we need to make sure that the battery gauge is working and accurate. However, before we install this, there is one little mod that I want to do before we put it in. As you can see here, we got some old halogen style crusty. That one doesn't obviously work. It's completely black. And we're going to replace them for something a little bit better. And that's where these guys come in. Not a sponsor, but I'm hoping that these LEDs here are going to work perfect for this application. Process is basically just removing the old bulb like that and replacing it with the LED. Simple as that. So let's go ahead and bang this out, and then we'll get this in truck and we'll make sure that all of this stuff is functioning how it should. That is officially the LED backlighting upgrade complete. Actually, now this backlighting upgrade is complete. Anyways, let's get this thing in the truck. So I've just got the instrument cluster kind of resting in here right now. We do have to pull it back out to do things like the speedo cable and a couple other things we got to button up back there. But I do have it plugged in right now, so we should technically be able to see if all of our gauges are working. And let's start with our battery gauge. So as soon as I flick this ignition on, we should see that jump up in between those. Yeah, that's pretty good. I would say that's about accurate. I haven't actually technically tested the battery voltage at this minute, but that's about what I would say it would be. A fully charged battery is 12.6 volts. This is probably a little bit under that. So we know that that is working, and that is a good sign. So that leaves us with the final and probably the most important gauge to be working, the oil pressure gauge. If we crank this thing over, it's probably going to take a minute, but we should get a decent amount of oil pressure. We should almost be able to max this pressure gauge out. I would say that's pretty dang good oil pressure, and the fact that it came up that fast. Obviously, we've been cranking this thing a lot already, but I'd say that that was pretty dang good. You know what? Just for the hell of it, let's blind ourselves with these LEDs. Well, that was a complete and total fail. Still not a sponsor, but if you're planning on doing this on a C10, don't buy this specific LED. From the looks of it, these tongs on here just don't like the way that these sockets that go in the back of these are, and they just don't make a good connection 90% of the time. A couple of these things I'm pretty sure are just dead right out of the box too. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm either gonna order a set that has a longer set of wires like this, because I can get something like this to work if I kind of wrap it around this. Or the other option is just replace all the bulbs and get a good quality halogen set, and then that way they're dimmable and everything else. So Anyways, I've been pulling my hair out for the last like half an hour trying to figure out why the heck those bulbs weren't working, or why one bulb was working and then this one, and so on and so forth. So anyways, we'll deal with this at a later date. I got to order some more parts for that. And yeah, but let's continue on either way. I think the plan is to make sure that everything is happy as far as the engine running and stuff like that goes before we go ahead and completely wrap all of this stuff up, because I don't plan on using loom like I did on these wires. I'm actually going to wrap most of this stuff in Tessa tape just because of the way that the routing is down here. It's going to be really tough to shrink tube it. Technically, the only thing left that we need to hook up in order to make this thing fire is the fueling. But before we go ahead and button that up, I do want to do one thing before I forget, and that is install this drive shaft. It's got a little bit of a tight spot, especially at full lock one way and the other, and it's supposed to be real smooth. Smooth as butter, I like to say, kind of like this one. And that one's good. This middle one's nice and smooth. But this one, like I said, it has that tight spot. So we're gonna bang a new U-joint into this thing, and hopefully the vibration that I've been feeling, feels like a drivetrain vibration, is all to do with that little tight spot in that U-joint. Pro tip, before you disassemble, don't forget to mark the orientation of the yoke to the shaft here in this case, or if you're separating the joints or doing anything where you're pulling stuff apart, I always like to mark a line, and make it very obvious which way this thing is going to go back together. So anyways, new U-joint coming in hot. And just like that, we have a new U-joint. I did go ahead and clean up the yoke on this as well, just with a little bit of emery cloth. There is a tiny bit of pitting where the seal was sitting before, but what I normally do with these is after everything's up and in the truck, I'll compress the suspension and kind of set the seal somewhere slightly different than where it was riding before. Now this didn't leak before, but I also don't like how that groove looks in there. There is a brand new seal in the tail shaft of the transmission, so we don't want to ruin that, and we also don't want to have to end up getting ourselves a new yoke. But as you can see, this thing now does not have a hard spot anywhere. It's just as smooth as the other two U-joints. So all that is left is to pump these things full of grease, re-grease the center yoke, and this thing is ready to go back in the truck. All right, round two with the cluster lighting. I went ahead and picked up some CAN bus style LEDs. I did have a couple of these kicking around already, not enough to do the whole cluster, but they seem to work. So I ordered another pack of these specifically, and I'm also hoping, because these are CAN bus controlled ones, which are for systems that are sensitive and have warnings on the dash when you install LEDs. Obviously this truck isn't going to have any of that, but I'm hoping that these are better for dimmability with the factory switch, but we won't find out until we get the cluster in. And speaking of which, I've gone ahead and installed all of these, and we're gonna put it back in the truck, and hopefully everything works as it should this time. Well, still got some weird other issues going on here. Some lights are working, some lights aren't. I think it's just not happy with the LED bulbs because it's not designed for it. So you know what? At this point, I think we're just gonna abandon ship and go back to halogens. It was worth a shot. Now you guys know. If you guys know of some bulbs that will work better for this that are LEDs, let me know, because I'm a little frustrated. But you know what? It is what it is. We're gonna leave this cluster up in here. I've got it plugged in, and we'll worry about the lighting later. So now that the drive shaft is installed, the speedo is installed, so we got some instrumentation for the first start. Let's go ahead and complete a couple other small preliminary things, and then we can try and fire this baby up. First thing on the list is giving this engine some fuel. As you can see, we don't have any fuel lines hooked up to the mechanical pump right now, so let's go ahead and do that. We just basically need a short line that runs back from the tank to the inlet of the fuel pump, and then we have the outlet of the fuel pump that runs up to this line, which eventually comes up and feeds the carburetor there. All right, fuel lines are officially connected. Next thing I want to do before I fire this thing up is actually pull the belt off of this thing. I don't like running the power steering pump dry above cranking RPM, obviously. Plus, I'm still not 100% confident in my belt drive system that I kind of had to fabricate myself. So for the first start, let's just worry about the engine actually starting up and not throwing a belt. And if there's no belt on it, it can't throw a belt. So let's take this thing off. All right, guys. I think it's finally time to see if we can get this baby to fire up. Well, almost time. The first thing that I want to do is make sure that everything is primed. Fuel system primed and oil system primed. Before we give this thing everything it needs to run, we're actually just going to take away spark for the minute, aka unplug the power to the coil. That way we get no spark, and we can crank this thing over, make sure we get good oil pressure, and more importantly, get some fuel up to the carburetor. So let's go inside and crank this thing over a bunch. All right, so we should hopefully, when we're cranking this over, well, we know that this thing gets good oil pressure, but we're gonna crank it again, make sure we build up some good oil pressure. And as you can see here, our little filter is full of gas. So that means we have fuel coming from the pump and making it to the carburetor. So let's go ahead and plug our ignition coil back in. And let's attempt a first start. So here goes nothing. Fire in the hole. So as you saw, we did develop a little bit of a fuel leak when this thing started up. Just had to go ahead and tighten up this clamp a little bit, and this thing is no longer leaking. So catastrophe avoided. So I went ahead and pulled the spark plug out of this thing, and this thing is extremely wet and reeks of gas. So definitely flooded it, and that would actually make sense because I totally forgot we still don't have a ground for our choke. So as soon as this thing fired up, this choke should have started to open up, and it would have let it idle. Plus I was giving it a little bit more gas because obviously I want to keep the revs up as high as I possibly can to give the camshaft its best chance to survive. So that totally makes sense as to why it shut off and wouldn't restart. In the next video, we're definitely going to build that ground wire for the electric choke, get the choke working, and then hopefully we can get this thing to fire and stay running so that we can perform our camshaft break-in. Regardless, guys, I'm gonna count that as a win for this video. We're gonna officially say that this thing did start up, although it did die and didn't like staying running. No fault but my own on this one. In the next video, we should be able to get this baby broken in, so stay tuned, and if you're not subscribed, subscribe, because once this baby's out on the road, you guys are not gonna wanna miss those videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.